In the weeks following Tanzania's tense post-election violence, the country has finally begun to breathe again. What felt like an endless cycle of tension, fear, and uncertainty is now slowly giving way to calm streets, open markets, and a cautious sense of hope. This video dives deep into how Tanzania moved from that dark moment to where it is now, a nation steadying itself after chaos, healing wounds that were both physical and emotional, and finding its footing after a storm that shook the confidence of millions. For many citizens, the memories are still fresh, but so is the relief that the worst has quieted down. Today, we take you through the journey of how Tanzania reached this point of calm, what changed, and what life looks like now across the country. For those who lived through the height of the unrest, the shift in the national atmosphere is impossible to ignore. The same streets that once echoed with chants, sirens, and running footsteps are now filled with vendors arranging fresh produce, children laughing on their way to school, and boda riders weaving through traffic like any normal day. The transition didn't happen overnight. In the early days after the clashes, fear hung in the air like smoke from the burning tires that had blocked major roads. People stayed indoors, windows were shut, conversations were whispered, and everyone moved with caution, unsure of what might unfold next. But slowly and progressively, the intensity began to fade. Community elders stepped forward, religious leaders held gatherings, and even local authorities, under pressure to restore public trust, started engaging directly with citizens. Neighborhood meetings returned, street patrols reduced, and families who had fled to rural areas started trickling back to their homes in the cities. It was a fragile calm at first, the kind that felt like a thin sheet of glass, strong enough to see through but easy to break. Yet with each passing day, life restored itself piece by piece. Markets reopened earlier than many expected. Traders who had shut their stalls for safety reasons came back with fresh energy, determined to rebuild lost income. The transportation sector also recovered quickly. Buses that had been parked out of fear resumed their routes, and cross-regional travel, which had been risky and unpredictable, returned to its usual pace. In Dar es Salaam, Arusha, Mwanza, Dodoma, and other major towns, the return of normal traffic noise became a strange comfort, a sign that the situation had truly improved. What stands out most is the resilience of ordinary Tanzanians. Despite the fear and trauma of what they witnessed, the confrontations, the arrests, the uncertainty of who to trust, people found ways to support one another. Neighbors shared food during the tense days, youth groups helped clean up debris left on the roads, and women's groups organized small community discussions to cope with the emotional toll. This spirit of togetherness played a major role in cooling down the country faster than expected. Now, as travel resumes, businesses reopen, and social events return to the calendar, a new chapter is clearly unfolding across Tanzania. The country is not pretending that the violence never happened. Instead, people are quietly processing it while choosing to move forward. And that is what makes this moment so important. What we see today is not just calm, it is recovery. As calm slowly returned across Tanzania, the early signs of recovery were subtle, almost fragile, but unmistakable. In many neighborhoods that had spent days filled with sirens, shouting, and the heavy tension of uncertainty, people began stepping out of their homes again, cautiously at first, as if testing whether the storm had truly passed. Shops that had closed their metal shutters for fear of violence started reopening one by one. You could see the small kiosks fixing their broken signboards, street vendors arranging their displays again, and public buses, dala-dalas, resuming their routes, with drivers exchanging cautious smiles. It wasn't full normalcy yet, but it was a clear signal. Life was trying to reclaim its place. Reports from different regions painted the same picture. In Mwanza, markets that had been nearly deserted during the height of the unrest were now buzzing again, though at a slower pace. In Arusha, locals who had spent days indoors began gathering in small groups, discussing the events and trying to understand how things escalated so quickly. Even in Dar es Salaam, where the tension had been at its peak, roads that were once blocked by protesters and security forces were now clear, allowing movement to gradually resume. Nighttime still felt heavy. People remained indoors earlier than usual, but during the day, the rhythm of daily life was steadily returning. What surprised many was how Tanzanians responded after the violence. Despite all the anger, fear, and frustration, people were already showing signs of unity, checking in on neighbors, helping rebuild damaged properties, and sharing food where shops had temporarily run out of supplies. Community leaders played a huge role during this period, moving from house to house, urging people not to lose hope, assuring them that things would eventually stabilize. Religious institutions also opened their doors, offering comfort and pushing for patience and peace. It was as if the nation, exhausted by anxiety, collectively decided that healing was the only way forward. However, beneath this calmness, the memories of what happened were still fresh. Many people were still shaken, especially those who had witnessed the worst of the violence firsthand. Stories continued spreading, some truthful, others exaggerated, making it even harder for the public to fully trust that everything was truly over. Some feared the tension might return if the political situation didn't improve. Others believed the worst had already passed and that the country was now moving toward a safer, quieter period. You could feel the uncertainty in conversations across the country, but you could also feel an underlying determination. Tanzanians wanted peace more than anything else. By the end of that week, authorities began reducing their presence on the streets. Military trucks that once patrolled busy junctions were seen less frequently, and police officers who had been stationed in marketplaces were gradually withdrawn. This move alone brought a sense of relief to many residents who felt the heavy presence had been a reminder of the chaos. Schools began preparing to reopen, transportation resumed fully, and more businesses extended their operating hours. Slowly, the normal rhythm of Tanzania began stitching itself back together. The country was not yet the same, but it was undeniably moving in a better direction. And while the emotional scars would take longer to heal, the atmosphere had clearly shifted. People were breathing easier, conversations were lighter, and the fear that once gripped entire communities was beginning to fade. Tanzania, after days of intense turmoil, was finally cooling down. In the months that followed those tense post-election days, something remarkable began to unfold across Tanzania. A slow but steady rebuilding of trust, community spirit, and public confidence. At first, the peace felt fragile, like a thin layer of calm sitting on top of unresolved fears. But as time passed, that early calm matured into something stronger, something more genuine. People started noticing that the streets, which once echoed with shouts, tear gas, and running footsteps, were now filled with everyday movement again. Children walking to school, boda riders weaving through traffic, small shops reopening their doors, and markets returning to their usual energy early in the morning. Across cities like Dar es Salaam, Arusha, Dodoma, Mwanza, and Tanga, the difference was visible. The heavy presence of security forces that had worried civilians began to fade gradually, leaving behind a softer atmosphere where people felt they could breathe again. Families who had been afraid to step outside past sunset were once again gathering outside their homes, talking with neighbors the way they used to. Even business owners who had shut down temporarily, fearing looting or clashes, slowly reopened, surprised to see customers returning with confidence. The rhythm of Tanzanian life, known for its friendly interactions and steady, calm culture, began to return. What has strengthened this peace even more is the collective effort of the people themselves. Community elders, religious leaders, youth groups, and local organizations started holding conversations encouraging reconciliation and unity. Many believed that if the peace was to last, it had to be built from the ground up, not just through political statements. Because of this, discussions were held in mosques, churches, community halls, even roadside gatherings. Simple conversations reminding people that Tanzania's strength has always come from ordinary citizens choosing stability over chaos. Even today, the calm that now defines Tanzania feels far from forced or temporary. Travelers confirm that roads are safe, public transportation runs normally, and daily activities continue smoothly. People move freely at night, markets stay active deep into the evening, and public events attract large crowds without tension. What makes the peace even more impressive is that it exists despite the hurt, anger, and mistrust that erupted during the post-election violence. Instead of allowing those wounds to divide the country permanently, Tanzanians have leaned into patience, understanding, and resilience. And as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Tanzania found itself settling into a new reality, one where the fear that once gripped the nation has been replaced by cautious optimism. People still remember what happened, and many still hope for deeper political reforms and more accountability, but they also acknowledge that the peace they have today is a precious foundation, one they must protect at all costs. That is the Tanzania of today, calmer, more stable, and gradually healing, showing the world that recovery is possible even after a period of uncertainty. As the calm settled more firmly across Tanzania, daily life began finding its natural rhythm again. Slowly at first, then with growing confidence. What stood out most during this period was how ordinary citizens, from Dar es Salaam to Arusha to Mwanza, gradually relearned the comfort of routine. Markets that once operated with uncertainty now bustled from sunrise, with traders calling out prices, boda riders weaving through streets, and children in school uniforms walking in small groups, as if the tension of previous weeks had never existed. The return of these familiar scenes didn't happen overnight, but when it came, it restored a sense of emotional relief that had been missing for too long. People began reopening businesses they had shut down just for safety, and community gatherings, weddings, church meetings, mosque activities, and neighborhood football matches returned with an energy that felt almost symbolic. In many areas, you could hear people openly reflecting on how grateful they were to see life resume. Conversations were calmer, people smiled more easily, and the atmosphere that had once been thick with speculation now carried a sense of shared relief. Even the local matatu drivers, who are often the first to sense national tension, began joking again with passengers as they waited for the vehicles to fill. Meanwhile, the country's public services also resumed normal functioning. Hospitals that had been busier during the chaotic days because of fear-induced overcrowding were once again running smoothly. Administrative offices reopened fully, queues returned, and people could process their documents, renew licenses, or apply for permits without worrying about interruptions. Teachers reported better attendance. Farmers returned to their fields. Fishermen were back in the lakes. Everywhere, you could feel a nation settling back into itself. The most powerful part of this new calm was how visibly people wanted to move forward. You could hear it in conversations in buses, in the markets, and even in social media discussions. Tanzanians didn't pretend the past weeks had been easy, but there was an unspoken agreement that peace was more important than reopening old wounds. A quiet determination spread across communities. People wanted stability. They wanted their children to grow up without fear, and they wanted tourists and investors to see Tanzania the way they had always seen it. Warm, peaceful, and welcoming. And so, day by day, as the uncertainty faded, a new sense of unity began to grow. Not loud, not forced, just a natural, collective step forward by millions of people who decided that the chapter of chaos was over, and the chapter of calm had begun. As the days turned into weeks and the tension slowly drained from the streets, Tanzanians everywhere began rediscovering what normal life felt like again. What had once been loud, chaotic, and unpredictable slowly shifted into something familiar, something peaceful. The markets, which had been unusually quiet during the peak of unrest, came back to life with the sounds of bargaining, laughter, and business moving at its usual rhythm. Vendors who had temporarily stayed indoors reopened their stalls, confident that the danger had passed. Even major urban centers like Dar es Salaam, Arusha, Mwanza, and Dodoma felt calmer, with traffic flowing normally and people moving around without fear or hesitation. Public transportation, which had been operating cautiously during the conflict, resumed its full routes. Buses and bodas once again filled the roads, carrying workers, students, and families going about their day. Schools reopened with renewed hope, and you could see children running in school uniforms, shouting excitedly as if eager to reclaim their childhood routines. Teachers, who had also been affected by the uncertainty, returned to classrooms determined to restore stability for the younger generation. Religious centers, too, became places of healing. Churches and mosques filled up once again, not just with worship but also conversations of hope, forgiveness, and unity. Leaders encouraged people to rebuild trust, reminding them that peace is not just the absence of violence, but the commitment to live together despite differences. Many communities held small gatherings aimed at reconciliation, allowing neighbors to talk openly about their experiences during the unrest and to remind each other of the importance of remaining united. Business communities were among the first to push for a full return to stability. Shops extended their operating hours, hotels began welcoming guests again, and tourist areas slowly revived. For many months, tourism, a key pillar of Tanzania's economy, had taken a hit, but now local tour operators were reporting improved bookings. Even at the ports and border crossings, operations returned to efficiency, showing that the nation was not just healing socially but economically too. What became most evident during this period was the resilience of the Tanzanian people. Despite everything they had gone through, fear, uncertainty, loss of income, and emotional stress, they showed extraordinary determination to move forward. Friends and families reunited after weeks of staying apart. Community leaders held meetings to encourage calm and cooperation. Local radio stations shifted from discussing conflict to highlighting positive stories of recovery and rebuilding. Everywhere you looked, there was a shared feeling that Tanzania was stepping into a new chapter, one shaped not by the chaos of the post-election violence, but by a collective decision to reclaim peace. And even though the scars of the unrest were still fresh, the strength of the people was beginning to shine brighter than the memory of those dark days. As the dust slowly settled across Tanzania, one of the most surprising developments was how quickly the country began finding its way back to a sense of normalcy. After the chaos and tension that had shaken communities, many people wondered how a nation that had been so divided managed to pull itself together within such a short time. But the truth is that the path back to peace did not come from a single action. It came from a combination of efforts, decisions, and a deep desire among ordinary citizens to restore the calm they had always known. Tanzanians, despite their frustrations and conflicting political views, share one thing that has shaped the country for generations: an instinctive longing for stability. And that longing became one of the biggest forces pushing the country away from violence and towards reconciliation. One of the first and most visible steps that helped ease tension was the gradual withdrawal of heavy security units from residential areas. Even though military and police patrols had been positioned to control unrest, their presence kept fear alive in many communities. When the state started reducing roadblocks and allowing people to move freely without constant checks, it signaled to the public that the situation was finally calming down. Businesses reopened, public transport resumed, and for many citizens, simply being able to walk to work without anxiety felt like a sign that life was returning to normal. This easing of the security grip helped reduce the emotional pressure that had been building for weeks. Another major contributor was the role of community leaders, religious elders, and local administrators who stepped in to encourage dialogue. Across neighborhoods, people held small local meetings, not political rallies, but simple gatherings aimed at restoring trust. Religious leaders preached messages of calm, reminding people that Tanzania's strength had always been its unity. Their voices mattered because during the height of the violence, fear and misinformation had spread like wildfire. Hearing reassuring words from respected figures helped many citizens feel grounded again. These voices created a sense of collective healing, guiding people to focus not on what had already gone wrong, but on what could still be saved. Media and online spaces also played a role, although in an unexpected way. During the unrest, social media had been one of the biggest engines of tension, with videos, rumors, and unverified claims fueling anger. But as days passed, the tone slowly changed. Instead of clips of clashes, people began sharing scenes of normal life. Families reopening shops, boda riders returning to the roads, children going back to school. These everyday moments reminded Tanzanians that conflict was not their natural way of life. Seeing the country slowly returning to familiar rhythms ignited a sense of hope that pushed communities away from violence. Even the government, after facing intense criticism and pressure, began adjusting its approach. Statements became more measured, security became less aggressive, and officials started focusing on restoring services instead of confrontation. While many citizens still disagreed with the political system, they noticed the change in tone. Calm leadership, even when imperfect, helped reduce the emotional temperature across the nation. People may not have fully trusted the government, but they welcomed any decision that moved the country closer to peace. But perhaps the greatest force behind the return of calm was the people themselves. Tanzanians refused to let the chaos define them. Many had lived through tense moments before, and they understood that the longer violence continued, the more the economy and everyday life would suffer. Families wanted their children back in school. Traders wanted their markets functioning again. Workers wanted to return to their jobs. This collective push from ordinary citizens created a kind of silent national agreement. No matter how angry people were about the election, they were not willing to allow the country to collapse. That determination became the backbone of the peace that slowly spread from region to region. By the time normal movement resumed, the sound of protests had faded, and the streets that once echoed with fear now carried the usual rhythm of daily life. It wasn't that all problems had been solved, far from it. But Tanzanians chose peace over continuous conflict, and that decision alone carried the country further than any political statement or official announcement could. Today, the calm that has returned to Tanzania stands not only as a sign of recovery, but as a reminder of the country's ability to hold itself together even after moments that threatened to split it apart. As peace slowly settles across Tanzania, conversations about President Samia Suluhu, who remain some of the most emotional and deeply divided discussions happening in homes, markets, and social spaces across the country. Even though calm has returned, many Tanzanians still connect the memories of the post-election violence with her leadership, and that has shaped how people speak about her today. Across many neighborhoods, people openly express that the tension and fear they lived through were a direct result of the decisions made during and immediately after the election. You'll hear stories from residents who believe that the government underestimated the frustrations of the public, dismissed early warnings, and allowed heavy-handed security responses that escalated the situation. For these people, Samia Suluhu is still viewed through the lens of that chaotic period, and trust remains shaken. They talk about how the violence felt avoidable, and how the government's reaction only fueled anger instead of calming it. In conversations with youth, especially those who were most active during the demonstrations, you hear even sharper criticism. They often say that the administration lost contact with the struggles of ordinary citizens, choosing instead to secure political survival at the expense of public safety. Many young Tanzanians still believe that her victory was not earned fairly, and because of that, they feel her leadership lacks legitimacy. Even today, some admit that while the streets are calm, their hearts are not fully settled, because they fear that the same political behavior could easily trigger future unrest. On the other side, you also find a smaller group of Tanzanians who argue that the pressure on Samia Suluhu has been exaggerated. These people say that while the violence was severe, the president eventually took steps, though slow, to ease tensions, open dialogue, and restore order. They believe she was overwhelmed by political forces within her own party, and that she did what she could under very difficult circumstances. But even within this group, there is a quiet acknowledgement. The violence happened under her watch, and that stain is something she may never fully erase. Across the country, there is also a strong sense of caution when people discuss her future. Many Tanzanians say they are watching closely to see whether the government truly learns from the past or simply moves forward as if nothing happened. Some residents express hope that the calm environment today will push the leadership to rebuild the public's trust, increase transparency, and avoid the mistakes that triggered so much pain. Others claim that unless Samia Suluhu makes bold changes, the peace Tanzania is enjoying now could be temporary. But what stands out most in these conversations is the honesty. Tanzanians are openly reflecting on the trauma they lived through, the disappointment they felt, and the lessons they expect their leaders to learn. Whether people support her or criticize her, almost everyone agrees that the violence was a turning point. One that changed how Tanzanians view authority, elections, and the responsibility of those in power. For many, Samia Suluhu's name will always be tied to that moment in history, and the conversations happening today reflect a nation still healing, still questioning, and still hoping for truly accountable leadership. As weeks turned into months, the signs of a calmer Tanzania became more visible in everyday life, not through big announcements, but through small, meaningful changes that people could actually feel. Streets that once echoed with tension, sirens, crowds, hurried footsteps, gradually returned to their familiar rhythm. Markets reopened fully, vendors arranged their goods without constantly glancing over their shoulders, and public transport resumed its usual chatter-filled rides. For many citizens, the real symbol of peace wasn't in speeches or statements. It was in the simple ability to walk freely again, buy groceries without anxiety, or send children to school without worrying about unrest erupting nearby. Communities began rebuilding trust quietly, each at their own pace. Local leaders and elders played a huge role in this process, organizing neighborhood dialogues where people could finally express what they felt during the violence. Fear, anger, confusion, but also hope. These conversations didn't solve everything, but they helped people see that they all wanted the same thing: stability. Religious institutions also stepped in strongly, holding joint prayers and peace gatherings, reminding Tanzanians that shared identity runs deeper than political tension. It wasn't uncommon to see Muslims and Christians standing side by side, asking for calm across the nation. Businesses started picking up again, though cautiously. Tour companies reopened bookings, hotels began receiving inquiries, and the tourism sector, hurt the most during the violent period, slowly found its feet. Even domestic travel increased as Tanzanians themselves tested the waters, moving comfortably between regions that had previously been hotspots of unrest. This movement reassured the entire nation that the fear was fading, replaced by confidence that the worst was behind them. Still, the calm did not come without emotional scars. Many families affected by the violence were still healing internally. Some lost loved ones, some lost businesses, and some lost trust in the government entirely. But what stood out most was the resilience of Tanzanians, the ability to keep living, keep rebuilding, and keep believing that the country could recover if everyone pushed in the same direction. Government institutions, though still criticized, became more active in showing up at community events, visiting affected areas, and speaking about unity. Whether people fully trusted these gestures or not, the engagement itself helped lower the political temperature. Tanzanians appreciated being seen and heard, even if opinions remained divided about what truly caused the violence and who should take responsibility. By this time, many international observers noted how quickly Tanzania managed to return to stability compared to other nations that had experienced similar turmoil. But for Tanzanians, it wasn't speed that mattered. It was the feeling that life was finally returning to what it used to be, that the heavy cloud over the nation was lifting, and that they could breathe again. The streets were calmer, conversations were lighter, and life, normal life, was slowly finding its place again. Months after the post-election unrest, Tanzania has entered a period of relative calm, and life in cities and towns is slowly returning to its normal rhythm. Streets that were once tense and cautious now bustle with activity. Markets are lively again, and public transportation runs without the fear of sudden disruptions. Citizens are beginning to reclaim their daily routines, from school children walking safely to classes to office workers commuting without worry. The atmosphere reflects not only the resilience of Tanzanians but also the collective effort to move past the trauma of the earlier unrest. The media and social networks are filled with discussions about the transformation, highlighting how neighborhoods are reopening and community activities are resuming. Many Tanzanians express relief at the newfound peace, appreciating the sense of stability that has settled over the country. Cafes, shops, and local businesses, which once faced closures during moments of tension, now operate with renewed confidence, and tourism spots are cautiously welcoming visitors who were previously hesitant due to reports of unrest. Yet, the recovery is not just physical but also emotional. Families, communities, and local leaders have been working tirelessly to heal the societal rifts caused by weeks of uncertainty and fear. Community dialogues, neighborhood safety initiatives, and civic programs have been introduced to encourage trust, open communication, and cooperation among residents. Citizens report feeling safer walking through their neighborhoods, attending social events, and participating in local governance initiatives. At the same time, the role of the authorities in maintaining order remains a point of discussion. While the post-election period saw accusations of heavy-handedness, today, Tanzanians are reflecting on the balance between security and civil liberties. There is a growing sentiment that the country can continue to strengthen institutions, ensure accountability, and promote transparent governance to prevent future unrest. Overall, the current calm is a sign of resilience and determination among Tanzanians. The streets, schools, markets, and public spaces are alive once more, but the lessons from the post-election period linger in public consciousness. Citizens are more engaged, vigilant, and hopeful that this peace is not temporary but a foundation upon which Tanzania can build a more stable, secure, and prosperous future. Thank you for watching this video and following the story of Tanzania's journey back to peace after the post-election unrest. The resilience of Tanzanians, the efforts of communities to heal, and the gradual return of normal life show how determination and unity can overcome even the most challenging times. If you found this video insightful, make sure to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear how you feel about Tanzania's recovery and the lessons that can be learned from this period. Stay tuned for more in-depth stories that bring you closer to the realities shaping nations today.